Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 2 books. Book 1. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim family in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 25. Decade of time later. 10 years have passed since Yasser Saif al-Din was released from prison. During those years, he served the remainder of his sentence outside of jail. His parole police officer carefully watched his movements. He was required to report once a week to his officer. The officer made several random visits to Yasser's apartment, but he never caught him of anything to indicate that he violated the conditions of his parole. Yasser did not go back to alcohol or drug use. He also did not tease or sexually harass any woman. He kept his nose clean. He confined himself in a small circle of a group of Muslim brothers. He regularly attended the mosque and prayed 5 times in the day. In short, Yasser has become a deeply religious and committed Muslim man. After a few years from the time of his release, he got married to the daughter of the Imam of the mosque. The Muslim Imam is originally from Pakistan. Although the girl is a university graduate, her father forced her to marry Yasser. The father found Yasser to be the most committed Muslim in his mosque. Yasser is the best reciter of the Quran. He has an exceptionally powerful and musical voice that moved the hearts of all his listeners and made them shed tears when they heard him reciting the verses of their sacred scripture. Therefore, the Imam of the mosque favored him from all other devotees and gave him in marriage his highly educated and extremely beautiful daughter. The daughter has not known any man before she slept with her husband Yasser. When he consummated his marriage with his new bride and found out that she is a virgin, the happy Yasser went and kissed the hands and feet of his father-in-law. Besides being a highly educated and extremely beautiful, the Pakistani girl is having a highly paid government job. She became his wife number 4. Yasser hasn't divorced his Sudanese 2 Muslim wives Badriya and Duriya, but his 3rd Christian wife Maria had divorced him as soon as he fell in ignominy and went to jail. His 4th marriage to the underage girl Brittany Johnson was considered by the court as criminal in nature, and their marriage certificate had been counted the work of forgery. Even so, the new convert Yasser Saif al-Din has counted all his former 4 marriages null and wished to find another 3 beautiful wives to complete the sunnah of his prophet by marrying 4 women at the same time. Anyhow, after 18 years from the time Yasser Saif al-Dawla was found guilty by the criminal court of those serious sexual offenses, the Sudanese community in Calgary had gone through many tremendous social changes. Many Sudanese new immigrants arrived in Canada and joined the community. Some of those newcomers became outstanding leaders in the community. Among those leaders, 3 Sudanese became shining stars amongst immigrants in the city of Calgary. The first one is a Muslim leader, the second a Christian pastor, and the third one is a medical doctor. They are known as Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed, and Dr. Sami Shams al-Din. Of course, the Muslim leader is the one who received the light of Islam in jail and became a great reciter of the Quran in the biggest mosque in Calgary and married the daughter of the Pakistani Imam. Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed became the most loved and respected leader of the Sudanese church in the city of Calgary. When he arrived in the city, Pastor Wahid found the Christian Sudanese people were divided into 3 tribal churches: Dinka Church, Noor Church, and Shuluk Church. Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed was able to reunite those rival churches in one strong Sudanese church. For that reason, he is loved and respected by the members of those former 3 tribal churches. Likewise, The members of the Arab Muslim Sudanese as well as the members of the African Christian Sudanese in the city of Calgary highly honored and valued Dr. Sami Shams al-Din for achieving a similar goal that Pastor Wahid has succeeded in achieving with those tribal churches. When Dr. Shams al-Din arrived in Calgary, the Sudanese immigrants were divided into the Arab Muslim Association and the African Christian Association. After a couple of years from his arrival, Dr. Shams al-Din succeeded in uniting those two Sudanese groups into one strong Sudanese association. He is the first person to be elected the president of the Combined Sudanese Association in Calgary. Dr. Shams al-Din was able to unite those two opposing groups because he is neither Muslim nor Christian. He is an atheist and secularist, but he respects the followers of both religions and treats them equally. However, Sudanese Muslims do not treat him as an apostate, but considered him still a Muslim. As a matter of fact, in the Muslim countries, the person would not be counted as an apostate unless he leaves Islam and joins another religion, and particularly Christianity. In the Muslim world, Muslims who call themselves atheists, communists, and secularists and openly denying the existence of Allah and refusing to accept Islam as a religion from heaven, no one would bother them. On the other hand, if a Muslim man forsakes Islam and embraces Christianity, he would be given 3 days to repent and come back to Islam. If he refuses to repent and return to Islam after 3 days, he would be put to death. The law of apostasy and the death penalty associated with it was based on many authentic hadiths commanded by the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever changed his religion, kill him." Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 6922. Allah's apostle said, "The blood of a Muslim who confesses that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah alone, and that I am his apostle, cannot be shed except in 3 cases. In cases for murder, the married Muslim person who commits the act of adultery, and the one who reverts from Islam and leaves the Muslims." Sahih Muslim, Volume 9, Book 83, Hadith number 17. Whoever you see splitting away from the Islamic Jama'ah, Muslim community, you must kill him. Sunan al-Nasa'i, Hadith number 4025. The Quran also supports the commandment of the Prophet of Islam and prescribes the death penalty to heretics and apostates. But if they turn back, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. And do not take from them any ally and not any helper. Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 89. Nevertheless, 5 Sudanese Muslim families refused to recognize the Combined Sudanese Association and formed their own group. As a matter of fact, those 5 families are part of a big Muslim immigrant group known as the Muhajirin. When Yasser Saif al-Din came out of jail, he joined that group and shortly he married the daughter of the Imam of the mosque. His marriage to the daughter of such a respected and highly honored religious leader elevated him to a high status among the Muhajirin group. After a couple of years, the Imam of the mosque ordained Yasser Saif al-Din a spiritual leader and gave him the honorable Islamic title of Sheikh. And after 7 years from the time of his release, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din became the leader of the Muslim Muhajirin group. His new position made him be well known and highly respected by Muslims in Calgary and all over Canada. Wherever he goes, Muslims crowd in front of him trying to kiss his hands and feet and be blessed by his spitting. In the Muslim world, the highly honored and loved religious leaders spit on the faces of their devotees with the belief that such spitting cures the sick and brings great blessings on the persons that spitted upon. The revered companions of the Prophet Muhammad used to wait eagerly for his bodily discharge whenever their prophet spat or urinated, believing to be blessed or healed by those discharges. The leader of the Sudanese Association, Dr. Shams al-Din, recognized Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, the highly respected religious leader of the Muslim Muhajirin. He knew that he is the same person who destroyed his family and caused the murder of his beloved Russian wife, Nadia, and behind the cruel execution of his precious daughter, Natasha. However, he hid that fact from everybody, including his 20-year-old granddaughter, Natasha. His granddaughter knew nothing about the past of her family. Her grandfather hid from her everything that happened to her mother and grandmother. He told her that her mother, father, and grandmother died in a car accident in Sudan. After that tragedy, he said to her he took her out of Sudan and immigrated to Ethiopia. They lived for 15 years in that country until finally, they immigrated to Canada. Natasha does not know that the leader of the Muhajirin, who is known by every immigrant in Calgary, is her own biological father. Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din could not recognize Dr. Sami Shams al-Din. He also does not know that he has a daughter by the name of Natasha who is living with him in the same city. By then, Natasha had grown up into an exceptionally beautiful girl. She is 20 years old and in her second year at the University of Calgary. Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed is also a phenomenally successful spiritual leader. He is pastoring 3 churches, the combined Sudanese church, an Arabic church, and an English-Canadian church. He is a very hardworking and dedicated man of God. Besides all those huge responsibilities, he is one of the directors of the Campus Crusade Group. He travels at least once in the month to various cities in the USA, Europe, Australia, and Canada and preaches the gospel and plant new churches. Wherever he went, he won new converts to Christ. His preaching of the gospel is focusing on Arab Muslims. Everywhere he traveled, he has targeted highly populated Muslims areas. Every year, he won many Muslims to Christ. Even in his city, Calgary, many Muslim Arabs left Islam and embraced Christianity through his preaching. He is conducting every now and then house-to-house outreach in Calgary City and Edmonton City. He also preached the good news of Jesus Christ in malls, public parks, and the University of Calgary and Alberta University. He had fruitful debates with intellectual individuals from Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist backgrounds. This fact created so much enmity and hatred between him and other Sudanese Muslims and Arab Muslims. Therefore, the spiritual leader of the Muslims Muhajirin, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, hates him with passion and despises him with bitterness. Everywhere Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed went, he shared his testimony. According to his testimony, he was born and brought up as an Arab Muslim Sudanese. His parents belonged to one of the purest Arab tribes in Sudan known as the Jalia. When he was a Muslim, he was called Omar Muhammad Ahmed, but after his conversion from Islam to Christianity, he changed his name to Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. He used to be a member of the notorious Islamic terrorist group known as the Muslim Brotherhood. During his study at Khartoum University, he used to plan and carry out many terrorist attacks inside and outside the university. He used to beat Christian Sudanese and harass them. Sometimes, he used to engage in hot debate with them about the falsehood of their religion. However, it was through those debates he came to know that Christians were peaceful and loving people as compared to his violent and hateful Muslim brothers. No matter how many times he attacked them physically and ridiculed their faith, still the Christian students responded in love and forgiveness. Their loving and peaceful attitudes changed his stony heart and compelled him to read their Bible with an open mind. Eventually, the love of Christ won his heart, and he converted to Christianity. On the day of his water baptism, he changed his name from Omar to Wahid. After his conversion to Christianity, his Muslim family had disowned him. He faced so much persecution from his family members and his ex-Muslim brothers. Still, he boldly confessed his conversion and shared the good news of Jesus with Muslims. Some of the Muslim brothers informed the police authority about him. As a consequence of that complaint, the Muslim convert Wahid was arrested, tried, and sentenced to be hanged to death because he refused to renounce his apostasy. However, the Lord Jesus worked a great miracle and saved him from his looming death. A couple of days prior to his execution, a Libyan jet fighter attacked Sudan and dropped bombs on some places in Khartoum City. It happened that one of those bombs fell in the jail where he was imprisoned and waiting for his execution. The bomb destroyed the jail's main gate. Many prisoners fled from prison. Wahid happened to be one of those escapees. When he ran away from jail, he went and hid in the house of one Christian family that he knew in the past. Shortly after, by the help of some Christian group, he managed to smuggle himself across the Sudanese-Egyptian border. In Egypt, he applied for refugee status, but his application was rejected by the UN office in Cairo. Only displaced Sudanese due to civil wars in South Sudan and the Darfur region are granted refugee asylum in Egypt. After that, Wahid suffered so much for over a year. During this period, he did many blue-collar jobs. He worked as a manservant in Egyptian houses, sanitation worker, and garbage man. While he was waiting for a miracle from heaven to relieve him from his hard life, Wahid joined a Christian group. Through that Christian group, the Muslim apostate Wahid Muhammad Ahmed was able to get an admission in a Bible college in Calgary, Canada. Though he arrived in Canada with a student visa, his Bible college authority helped him to obtain a landed immigrant visa. 3 years passed since he arrived in Canada. He is studying theology at a Bible college. He is working as a director for Campus Crusade and leading those 3 churches in Calgary, and yet he is only 22 years old. Chapter 26. From Criminal to Saint. Nevertheless, among those 3 outstanding Sudanese leaders in Calgary City, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din became known among big circles of Muslims. He is highly honored and loved by many Muslims, especially the members of his Muhajirin group. His group is receiving financial support from many Muslim countries. It is one of the richest Muslim groups in Canada. Its membership is opened for all Muslims in Calgary and Edmonton, no matter what their countries of origin. It is focusing on improving the social and spiritual conditions of Muslim immigrants and new converts. It is specialized in recruiting new members and converting non-Muslims to Islam. At those 2 goals, the Muhajirin became so successful after Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din took over its leadership. Although those are the main goals of the group, nevertheless the group has hidden agendas. Only the most trusted top leaders are aware of those concealed goals. Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din is living in a huge mansion and became filthy rich. The Canadian government recognized the great achievements of Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din and bestowed upon him many awards for his social and spiritual contributions in the Canadian multicultural society. He is highly honored because he entered prison as a dangerous sexual offender and came out as a Muslim saint. His outstanding role in the leadership of that peaceful Islamic group led the police authority to wave away his criminal record and grant him permission to move freely in Canada and other Western countries. He traveled all over the globe. He became one of the most powerful Muslim speakers. He is well known for his remarkable testimony. As a matter of fact, Sheikh Saif al-Din turned his nasty past criminal record into a powerful testimony that moved the hearts of those who heard it. Whenever he traveled to a Muslim country, he shared that testimony. According to his testimony, he was condemned as a dangerous criminal and convicted as a child abuser because he just followed the blessed sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, may the prayers and peace of Allah be upon him. His only crime was that he married a 14-year-old girl who was converted to Islam in his hands. Before her conversion, the girl was living in the streets and eating from what her body had earned as a hooker. Besides being a street girl and prostitute, she was alcoholic and drugs addict. She was born and brought up in an abusive home. She had no father, and her mother did not know who the father of her daughter was. So, she was born as a bastard child. Her mother was living with a man who was not her husband. This boyfriend of her mother often abused and beat her. He began to abuse her sexually when she was 10-year-old and raped her many times. When her mother landed in jail, her stepfather forced her to go to the streets and sell her body to bring money to him. When she could not tolerate any more the physical and sexual abuses of her stepfather, she ran away from home. She fled from Edmonton City and came to hide from her abusive stepfather in Calgary City. She was 13 years old when she began to live in the streets. She became a member of a notorious gang in the city of Calgary. The gang leaders forced her to sell her body and drugs and earn money for them. When she became 14-year-old, accidentally Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din met her in one of the Sudanese houses. On that day, she was picked up from the street by a Sudanese boy. The boy wanted to commit adultery with her and pay her a few dollars and then throw her back in the street. It so happened on that evening, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din and other Muslim brothers and sisters were having a house-to-house outreach. Allah destined that they went to that house and met the homeless and street girl there. Then Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din invited her to accept Islam, and he promised to provide her with decent accommodation and meet all her other needs. The girl responded to the invitation and accepted Islam on her own free will. After she embraced the religion of truth and the light of Islam entered her heart, she turned into a righteous girl. Out of compassion, the blessed Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din married her to protect her from those gangsters who were seeking to take her back to the streets to earn for them money by selling her thighs and their drugs. Sadly, when the gang came to know that the girl converted to Islam and married one of the righteous Muslim leaders in the city of Calgary, they plotted against her and her Muslim husband. They informed the police that she was kidnapped, brainwashed, imprisoned, raped, and impregnated by a Muslim leader. Those gangsters took advantage of the Canadian secular law, which permits the 14-year-old girl to have sex before marriage, but not to enter any marital relationship until she reached 18 years. Whenever Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din would reach this stage of his fabricated testimony, he always would make a contrast between the Sharia laws which he believed to be divinely revealed by Allah and the Canadian laws, which according to him were secular and man-made. The Islamic Sharia law permits the Muslim man to marry the girl even if she is 9 years old. In that, the Sharia laws were based on the example of the Prophet Muhammad who married and slept with his beloved wife, Aisha, when she was 9 years old, and he was 54 years of age. By the analogy of the Prophet Muhammad and his beloved child bride, neither Sheikh Yasser nor his Muslim listeners could see a crime of kidnap and rape in the case of his halal marriage with the converted 14-year-old wife. According to that fabricated testimony, instead of rewarding him for saving the life of a street girl who was dying of alcohol and drug addiction, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din was arrested and thrown behind bars. Then, his lawful marriage with that street girl was interpreted by a Canadian criminal court as kidnap and rape. After the criminal court found him guilty of kidnapping and raping a minor girl, he was incarcerated for 15 years, but spent only 8 years in prison and released for his good conduct. After his release from prison, he was forbidden by the Canadian law from being near children. He was not supposed to hug his own daughter, even if she was a couple of years old. He was not permitted to change the diapers of his own female children. He was not allowed to spend 5 minutes alone with a female who was underage. He was banned from going to any public place where there were children. He was not allowed to visit a public park, a restaurant, a movie theater, a beach, a mall, a store, etc., etc., etc. He was totally and completely isolated from society as if he was carrying a contagious disease. Where he was living, the police authority went from house to house informing people about his child abuse offense and warned them to keep their children away from him. Consequently, he was attacked by some bad teenage boys whenever he dared to step out of his apartment. Those bad grown-up boys threw stones at him and thus forced him to move to another place. Many times, his landlords kicked him out when the police informed them about his so-called dangerous offense. Finally, the imam of the mosque had pity on him and allowed him to live inside the house of Allah. He used to clean the mosque and wash its washrooms. The mosque did not pay him wages for his work. He only found free shelter and free food. After a short time, he became a Quranic teacher and reciter. Therefore, the Pakistani imam saw in him a charismatic leadership and nominated him as the leader of an Islamic group called the Muhajirin. The same virtuous imam later had agreed to give the great Quranic reciter and leader of the Muhajirin in marriage the hand of his university graduate daughter. When he married her, did he find her a virgin? She was a highly educated Pakistani girl with a master's degree under her belt and having a highly paid government job. She was one of the most beautiful Muslim girls in Canada. A few years later, the government of Canada issued a public apology to the greatest Muslim leader Yasser Saif al-Din and recognized him as one of the great religious leaders and social reformers. He received many awards from the public as well as the private sector. At this stage of his made-up testimony, Sheikh Yasser would pause for a while and asked his listeners, "Do you know what had happened to that poor girl who rescued from prostitution and addictions and converted her to Islam? And I had married her according to the Holy Quran and the blessed Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad? She returned to her addiction and street life. She was forced by those gangsters to go again into prostitution, alcohol, and drug addictions. Finally, that poor girl died as a stray bitch in the streets. She died of a drug overdose." Before sending her back to the streets, the government authority forced her to abort the baby because they believed she conceived him through rape. What that innocent baby did to them that they decided his death before he saw the face of his mother and father. That is the way Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din twisted his past evil criminal record and made of it a powerful Islamic testimony that moved the hearts of its listeners and made them pour hot tears whenever they heard him narrating it in crocodile tears. Chapter 27. The Smart Terrorist. Under that false religiosity and holiness, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din continues to be the same notorious womanizer and the female child abuser. Knowing that the country in which he is living would not allow him to satisfy his insatiable lust for women, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din came up with a tactic that enabled him to marry 4 women without being condemned by the Canadian law. He traveled to Egypt, married an Egyptian teenage girl, and kept her in her country, and every 3 or 4 months he visits her. The kind of marriage he did with that Egyptian girl is known in the Islamic Sharia as the Zawaj al-Masyar. It is a lawful Islamic marriage where the wife would continue to live with her parents and her husband would visit her occasionally. Likewise, he married a Nigerian girl in his visit to Nigeria and an Eritrean girl in his visit to Eritrea. His 3 overseas wives are underage girls. His Egyptian wife was 15 when he married her, and the Nigerian girl was 14 when he consummated his marriage with her. The Eritrean girl was 12 years old when she was given in marriage to Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din. No one in Canada knows that the highly honored Sheikh Saif al-Din had married and had sex with a 12-year-old girl under the Islamic child marriage. Besides those 3 wives, he has a wife in Canada, the daughter of the Pakistani imam of the mosque. By having 4 wives at the same time, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din completed the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, and that considered the highest form of devotion and piousness in Islam. Every committed Muslim man will strive hard to complete the Sunnah by marrying 4 women at the same time. With his 4 wives, he had fathered 13 children. Before he landed in prison, the notorious womanizer had married 3 Sudanese women, Badriya, Daria, and Maria, and with them begot 5 children. He also begot a son and a daughter without marriage with his victim, the late Natasha Sami Shams al-Din. So, in total the greatest virtuous sheikh had begotten 20 children with 8 women. As a matter of fact, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din entered the prison as a sexual offender and an abuser of the underage girl Brittany Johnson and came out as a dangerous Muslim terrorist. Nevertheless, he is mastering and carrying out his terrorist activities in a way that became very hard for any police intelligence to find out. Firstly, he understood that the police all over the Western countries carefully watching all Muslims. He never used Muslims in his terrorist operations. Secondly, he knew that the Western countries in high alert against any terrorist activity, and that why most of the terrorist plots in the West were foiled by the police authorities. Thirdly, Muslim terrorists carried out all suicidal missions, and since he decided never to involve Muslims in his operations, then that kind of approach is out of the question. Accordingly, by avoiding all those drawbacks, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din was able to mastermind and carry out very successful 3 terrorist attacks since he came out of jail. By examining one of those attacks, we would see how he masterminded and successfully carried them out. His last terrorist attacks were operated in New Delhi, India. Another policy of Sheikh Saif al-Din, he never carried out terrorist attacks in a country that he visited even once in his life. While he was enjoying his honeymoon with his 15-year-old Egyptian beautiful bride, Sheikh Yasser came up with the idea of blowing up both the Canadian and the American embassies in India. He informed one of his most trusted Egyptian men that he wanted to inflict severe pain in the hearts of the enemies of Allah. Then, he disclosed his entire plan to that man. The sheikh never committed anything in writing. Everything he decided or planned had to be memorized by heart and transmitted from one terrorist to another by the words of the mouth. His decisions and plans like that was when he made or uttered them, then they became divine responsibilities on the necks of those who heard them. According to that plot, the first step is that the Egyptian man had to travel to Pakistan. Then, he has to find some Pakistani religious leaders and convince them to participate in his deadly plan. The second step is to send some Islamic Pakistani mujahideen into India. Those mujahideen should find some Hindus to force them to smuggle the bombs inside the two embassies. This would be the most difficult and crucial step in the plan. The success and failure of the plot depended on this step. Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din drew a flawless plan to ensure the success of this step. According to his plan, those Hindus should not be picked at random. They must be married men living with their wives and children. They should be offered $10,000 each along with life threats to them and their wives and children. If they refuse to accept the financial offers, they should be told that the Pakistani Islamic Mujahideen would slaughter them along with their Hindu wives and children. Sheikh Saif al-Din, or the Sword of Islam, knew that in each American embassy and Canadian embassy in the Third World, the main guards are highly trained American and Canadian soldiers. The most difficult task was to penetrate through those foreign guards. If the guards were local soldiers, then it would be easy to either bribe them through money or intimidate them through life threats. But those easy tactics would not work with the highly trained American Marines. Also, the Sheikh knew that each person entering the embassy would be thoroughly checked out by the guards, including even the employees and workers. To pass those bombs through the checkpoints, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din proved his genius terrorist mentality. He decided that the Pakistani Mujahideen should pick up only those Hindu people who could not possibly be checked by the guards, even if they wanted to do so. The chosen Hindus have to be working in the electricity company that supplies power to the entire capital city of India. Following that genius plan, the Mujahideen found 5 electricity workers and offered them $10,000 along with those life threats. Out of fear for the lives of their wives and children, the Hindu workers accepted the offers. The planting the bombs inside the embassies should be carried out at the time the 5 workers are covering night shifts. The 5 workers have to create a power failure on the night prior to the operation. Then, 3 of them have to go to that area and pretend to be looking for the cause of that power outage. Electric power should be restored in each place except the areas where the 2 embassies are. 2 of them should be waiting for phone calls from the embassies. As soon as those calls are received, the 3 workers must be notified through cell phones and directed to go to the 2 embassies. When those workers arrived in the first embassy, the guards might do manual checks due to the power blackout. They will not be able to use their electronic devices to check the electricity workers. The guards might try to find out what was the religious affiliation of those workers. The 3 workers' names would reveal their religious backgrounds. Each Hindu worker should have a government-issued photo ID with him. Most likely, the guards would not bother to do painstaking checks when they see the identity cards of the Hindu workers. That is exactly what happened in both embassies. The guards used their flashlights and did routine checks on those 3 Hindu workers. In that way, the bombs had been successfully smuggled inside the 2 Western embassies and planted in many offices and passages. On the following day at 10:30 a.m., some of the Pakistani Mujahideen used remote controls and detonated those powerful bombs. Not a single person was able to escape that cowardly terrorist attacks in both embassies. All employees, workers, guards, visitors, visas applicants, and bystanders were buried alive under those massive buildings. When those bodies were dug out, they found them were shattered in many bits and pieces. Not a single body was found intact. It was considered a genius terrorist plot and a total failure in the part of the Indian police intelligence. Through those guards who covered the night shifts and returned to their residences in the early morning, the 5 Hindu workers were identified and arrested by the police. When the Delhi police applied to them their harsh third-degree torture, the 5 Hindu workers confessed their parts on the plot. However, the investigations did not go beyond those 5 Hindu workers. The police could not be able to make any further arrests. Despite that, the Delhi police blamed Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, for the terrorist attacks on the American and the Canadian embassies. The whole investigation ended up by the following statement: "We have solved the American and the Canadian embassies bombings case," the police chief of New Delhi said during a televised news conference. The whole attack was planned by Pakistan's ISI and carried out by the Muslim terrorists of the terrorist group of the Lashkar-e-Taiba and their operatives in India. However, the mastermind and the financier of that cowardly terrorist attack, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, was in his opulent residence in Calgary, Canada with his Pakistani pretty wife. When his evil terrorist attacks were successfully carried out in New Delhi, India, and killed many innocent people. Chapter 28. The Love Affair. As we mentioned already, Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed likewise is another outstanding and successful religious Sudanese leader in the city of Calgary. Despite his young age and the huge responsibilities that he is shouldering by pastoring 3 churches and involving in much international evangelism, he is doing his biblical studies in one of the best Bible colleges in Western Canada. He is the most active Sudanese in the city of Calgary. He has to take care of the Sudanese church, the Arabic church, and the Canadian church. He is always either visiting a family for counseling or praying for its members or receiving visitors in his residence. He has to prepare for the Friday evening service for the Arabic church, Saturday evening service for the Sudanese church, and the Sunday morning service for the Canadian church. Every Thursday afternoon, he has a 1-hour radio program for the Arabic-speaking audience in the province of Alberta. He is also one of the directors of the Campus Crusade. His job with the Campus Crusade requires that at least once in the month he have to travel either to Netherlands, Australia, America, or other cities in Canada. In those visits, he always wins Muslims to Christ. Besides being a gifted pastor, he is also a remarkably successful evangelist. He had planted churches for the Arabic-speaking immigrants in many cities in Canada, America, Australia, and some European countries. Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed is loved by many people as well as hated by many more. Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din declared Pastor Wahid as an apostate and issued a fatwa permitting the shedding of his blood. Notwithstanding, due to the fear of the Canadian law which permits apostasy, Sheikh Yasser shared his fatwa among his elite circle of the Muhajirin group. All Sudanese Muslims in Calgary and Edmonton cities hate Pastor Wahid and considered him filthy, subhuman, traitor, and apostate. They spread all kinds of nasty rumors and slanders against him. They accused him of selling his Islamic religion and accepting Christianity for the sake of obtaining a visa to Canada. Many Sudanese in Calgary believe those false allegations. When he joined the Sudanese Association, Muslim members protested and demanded that he should be kicked out of the association. Nonetheless, Dr. Sami Shams al-Din accepted his application and refused to yield to the pressures of the Muslim members. In fact, the president of the Sudanese Association, Dr. Sami Shams al-Din and Pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed in a short time became good friends. Many times, Dr. Shams al-Din invited Pastor Wahid in his house for food. Likewise, Pastor Wahid many times invited Dr. Shams al-Din along with his granddaughter, Natasha, for having food in some famous Arabic, Ethiopian, Eritrean, Greek, and Chinese restaurants. Although Pastor Wahid is a remarkably busy man and loved by many people, still he is feeling so much pain in his heart for being rejected and isolated by his Sudanese people. In his heart, he has that longing for the love of his own people. He had never been loved by anybody from his people until he met Dr. Shams al-Din. Before the two met, the Muslim Sudanese community in Calgary treated Pastor Wahid as an outcast. Any time when he came across a Sudanese Muslim family, they always ignored him, and sometimes the women of that family spat on the ground as a sign of insult. If he tried to greet them, they would not answer back his greeting. If he smiled at them, they would show him angry faces. The only Sudanese family that broke the icy ground is Dr. Shams al-Din family. When other Sudanese Muslim families came to know that a northern Sudanese Muslim family is associating with the apostate Pastor Wahid, their anger is increased against Dr. Shams al-Din and his granddaughter. Although every Muslim Sudanese family knows that Dr. Shams al-Din is an atheist, still they treated him as a Muslim. Denying the existence of Allah or refusing to believe that the Quran is a revealed heavenly book would not put the person in trouble with the Sharia court. Such a person would still be treated as a Muslim by his family and other Muslims. Only when a Muslim leaves Islam and embraces Christianity would he be sentenced to death by the judge of the Sharia court. Sometimes, the apostate would be murdered by his own parents before his case reached the Sharia court. So, Dr. Shams al-Din and his granddaughter Natasha are counted as Muslims by all Sudanese Muslims in the city of Calgary. The case of Dr. Shams al-Din became serious when a rumor spread out that the apostate pastor Wahid Muhammad Ahmed is in love with his granddaughter Natasha. Some Sudanese Muslims came to Dr. Shams al-Din and inquired about the rumor. Dr. Shams al-Din did neither deny it nor confirm it. He told them that he knew nothing of such a love affair. He said further that his granddaughter is mature enough to choose her life partner. The response of Dr. Shams al-Din is a strong blow on the faces of those who approached him. It created great rage and restlessness in the hearts of those who heard it. Some of them went to Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din and asked him to intervene before such a catastrophe would happen among the Sudanese Muslims in Canada. The Sheikh Yasser assured them that such an abominable love affair between a Muslim Sudanese girl and the despicable apostate priest like Wahid would never take place as long as he is living. He swore by his God Allah while placing his right hand on his holy Quran that he would never allow that filthy infidel pastor to marry the Muslim granddaughter of Dr. Shams al-Din. Although the affair between Pastor Wahid and Natasha is an unconfirmed rumor, the two truly began to like each other. Pastor Wahid has that feeling towards Natasha, but hid it for the fear of losing the trust and respect of her grandfather. Likewise, Natasha scared that her grandfather would not accept such a friendship because they are from a Muslim background and Pastor Wahid is an apostate Muslim who became a Christian. She had already guessed that her grandfather was a kind of agnostic or an atheist. One day her grandfather told her that her deceased parents are Muslims, but he never taught her anything about her parents' religion. Even so, whenever the two Islamic festivals of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha arrived, her grandfather would take her to visit some Sudanese Muslim houses and Arab families, wish them happy Eid, and accept whatever they offer from food and candies. But she has never seen him one day praying or going to a mosque as other Muslim Sudanese do. She also has never prayed or knows how to pray. After she met Pastor Wahid and fell in love with him, Natasha is longing to visit the church where her lover is pasturing his sheep and listen to his sermon. But she never dared to ask her grandfather to take her to her boyfriend's church. That crucial moment came by itself. One day her father received in the mail an invitation card from Pastor Wahid's church. It is not an invitation to attend the Sunday service, but to attend an important event. Almost half of the city of Calgary was invited for that occasion. The invitation card stated that a Sudanese professor from the University of Chicago who converted from Islam to Christianity is coming to Canada and is going to share his testimony in Pastor Wahid's church on a Friday evening. Pastor Wahid is so excited about the event that he invited indiscriminately Christians as well as Muslims. He wants the Sudanese Muslim community in Calgary to know that he is not the only person who left Islam, but a highly educated and qualified Sudanese ex-Muslim man forsook Islam and coming all the way from America to share his testimony in Canada. Natasha is extremely glad when her grandfather expressed his willingness to take her to Pastor Wahid's church, attend the occasion, and listen to what the university professor is going to say about the reason that led him to forsake Islam and accepted Christianity. Chapter 29. It is written all over her face. Natasha Shams al-Din can read, write, and speak fluently 6 languages: Arabic, English, French, Russian, Amharic, and Tigrinya. She picked up the last 2 languages during her stay in Ethiopia. She learned Arabic and Russian at home because the former is her grandfather's language and the latter is her mother tongue. She learned both languages from her grandpa Dr. Sami Shams al-Din. She studied English and French at her school in Addis Ababa. At present, she is studying at the University of Calgary. Natasha is one of the most beautiful Sudanese girls in Calgary. Many Sudanese families wish that she would get married to one of their sons. Some of them even came to her grandfather and asked for her hand in marriage to their son. But her grandfather rejected any proposal that came from his granddaughter and insisted that Natasha has to choose her life partner by herself. Deep down in his heart, Dr. Shams al-Din wishes that his granddaughter would never fall in love with a Muslim boy. Natasha was born in Sudan, but she was brought up in Ethiopia and lived most of her childhood and schooling years among Christians. Although she is not a Christian, still she has not experienced any an Islamic upbringing. Her grandpa Dr. Shams al-Din was born and brought up as a Muslim, but during his study in Russia, he became an atheist and communist. He understood the mentality of the Muslim man, which always has the tendency of abusing his women, whether they are his daughters, sisters, or wives. So, he prefers that his granddaughter falls in love and marries a Christian boy. When Natasha was taken to Addis Ababa, she was just a few days old. At the age of 15, she immigrated to Canada along with her grandfather. She knows truly little about her homeland where she was born. She learned from her grandfather that her mother and father died in a car accident along with her grandmother. Natasha saw the photos of her mother and grandmother, but she did not see how her father used to look before he died in that fatal car accident. Therefore, she learned that her grandmother, Nadia Alexandrov, is a white woman who was born and raised in Moscow. From her grandmother, Natasha inherited those lovely green eyes and white skin and long hair that made her look like a foreigner rather than a Sudanese girl. When she reached 18, Natasha grew up into the most beautiful girl in Calgary City. Every boy sees her, he falls in love with her. She is the sweetest girl among all Sudanese girls. Many Sudanese families wish that her grandfather would agree to give her as a bride to one of their sons. Some Sudanese families even brought their marriage requests to her grandfather. Dr. Shams al-Din rejected all those marriage proposals and said to those who brought them that his granddaughter has the right to choose her life partner. He further said to them he cannot decide on her behalf on such a crucial decision in her life. Sudanese, like Indians, believe in an arranged marriage and consider love marriage as un-Islamic and will lead the girl to fall in the sin of adultery before her marriage. When Natasha became 20 years old, a rumor spread all over the city of Calgary that the Sudanese Muslim girl is in love with the apostate Sudanese priest Wahid Muhammad Ahmed. That rumor went around until one angry Muslim family had brought it to the ears of her grandfather. The son of that family is crazy in love with Natasha, but it is a one-sided love. The same family is trying to convince Dr. Shams al-Din to accept the marriage proposal of their son, but every time they get the same response. When Natasha's grandfather heard that rumor, he gave an answer which made every Muslim Sudanese upset with him. He told them that his granddaughter is mature enough to choose her life partner. Natasha happened to be at home when her grandfather gave that answer, which filled her heart with great joy. By that time, Natasha has already fallen in love with Pastor Wahid, and she knows that he loves her too. However, the two lovers have not spoken one single word to each other about their love. Natasha is struggling with the question of religious differences between those two faiths and thought her grandfather might refuse her un-Islamic love affair. In fact, Natasha grew up in a home that taught her nothing about any religion. She is like her grandfather, an irreligious person. Although she is identified by the Sudanese Muslim community as a Muslim girl, she does not know one single verse of the Quran or heard any hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. The only thing that related her to that religion is her family name and her parents' religious background. When she grew up in age, she heard here and there that Islam is the religion of terror and its male followers always control and oppress their women. But she did not bother to question the authenticity or falsehood of that information. The crucial moment in Natasha's life came when she entered the church and heard the testimony of the apostatized Sudanese professor. According to his testimony, when he was in high school, he began to doubt the teachings of Islam on women when his sister was forced by the Sharia court to live with her polygamist husband against her wishes. He said the police came to his house and dragged his sister by force and taken her to the house of her husband. Even so, it took him many years to fully grasp the differences between the teachings of Islam and Christianity on marriage. It was through his comparative studies of religions while he was doing his master and PhD degrees research that he understood the differences and converted from Islam to Christianity. From his testimony, Natasha understood that Islam gives the Muslim man the license to abuse his wife. She wept when she heard what had happened to the professor's sister. She knows that no woman in the world would agree to share her husband with another woman. She is so upset when she heard that the Sharia court in the Muslim countries have the legal power to force the wife to be taken by the police to her husband's house and force her to live with him against her wishes. Then, her husband, empowered by such law, has the right to imprison, beat, and rape his disobedient wife. In Sharia, such inhumane and barbaric law is called Haq Alta or Bait Alta, which means the law of obedience or the house of obedience. Natasha knows that even in the jungle, animals do not do that to their female counterparts. Even the barbarians or savages had not practiced such slavery law. Furthermore, from the professor's testimony, Natasha heard some teachings and practices about women that astonished her. She came to know that Islam is the only religion that permits polygamy, female genital mutilation, female child marriage, and wife beating. According to her understanding, those practices are not only abusive to women, but the evilest and barbaric customs she ever heard of in all her life. In her heart, she wondered how people could still follow such an evil religion. Although Natasha had already heard some claims that Islam is the religion of terror, the Sudanese professor's testimony confirmed those assertions. The testimony proved to her beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad openly sanctioned terrorism against the infidels. Allah's apostle said, "I have been ordered to fight against the people until they testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and that Muhammad is Allah's apostle, and offer the prayers perfectly and give the obligatory charity. So if they perform that, then they save their lives and property from me except for Islamic laws, and then their reckoning, accounts, will be done by Allah." Sahih al-Bukhari. Again, narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, "I have been made victorious through terrorism, and while I was sleeping, the keys of the treasures of the world were brought to me and put in my hand." Then Abu Huraira added, "Allah's apostle has left the world, and now you, people, Muslims, are bringing those treasures." Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 220. The Prophet Muhammad said, "I have been sent with the sword between my hands to ensure that no one but Allah is worshipped. Allah, who put my livelihood under the shadow of my spear and who inflicts humiliation and scorn on those who disobey my orders." The Quran says, "But when the forbidden months are past, then kill the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war, but if they repent, and establish regular prayers and practice regular charity, then open the way for them, for Allah is often forgiving, most merciful." Quran, Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 5. This verse is called the verse of the sword, which orders Muslims to kill any non-Muslim who refuses to accept Islam. It also states, "Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 29. Likewise, this verse orders Muslims to kill any Jew or Christian who refuses to accept Islam or pay the jizya to Muslim leaders. The Chicago University professor's testimony did not only convince Natasha about the evils of Islam, but it opened her mind and soul to the peaceful teachings of Jesus Christ. Her knowledge of Christianity was truly little before she listened to that Sudanese apostatized university professor. Accordingly, on that day she came to know the vast difference between the teachings of Jesus Christ and the Prophet Muhammad. She has become convinced that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He never took a sword, never ordered the killing of the infidels, and never forced anyone to accept him as the messenger of God. He taught his disciples to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them. Gospel of Matthew 5, verse 44. He did not give his male followers the right to oppress, abuse, and treat their women as animals or lower than animals as Muhammad did. He was meek and gentle with men as well as with women. He did not rape a 9-year-old girl as Muhammad did to the child victim Aisha. He did not commit adultery with his maidservant as the Prophet of Islam did with Maria, the Coptic Christian. Jesus did not rape his captive woman on the same day he murdered her husband, father, and brother as Muhammad did to the Jewish girl Safiya bint Huyay ibn Akhtab. Christ did not take his daughter-in-law from his adopted son, Zayd ibn Muhammad, and slept with her as the selfish Muhammad did with Zainab bint Jahash. After hearing that life-changing testimony, Natasha for the first time in her life decided to pay attention to the question of religion. Before that day, she spent 20 years of her life as an irreligious girl. But after that testimony, she approached Pastor Wahid and requested him to give her a copy of the Bible. However, before he gave her a copy of the Bible, Pastor Wahid asked her to talk to her grandfather about it. When Natasha asked her grandfather in front of Pastor Wahid, Dr. Shams al-Din responded by saying that religion, like marriage, it must be a personal decision. So, through his answer, Natasha understood that her enlightened grandfather acquiesced to her request. Likewise, Pastor Wahid got the green light and handed over a copy of the Gideon Bible to his beloved girlfriend. When she began to read the Gospels of Jesus, Natasha felt her soul was like a dry land that had never been watered before until she heard the wonderful words of Christ. His words fell on her soul like the spring of fresh water that issued out of the fountain of life. She could feel his words like the dew on her soul and could smell them like the fragrance after the rain. She loved every sentence that Jesus uttered in his Gospels. She almost memorized by heart the entire Sermon on the Mountain. Dr. Shams al-Din noticed the quick changes that took over in the life of his beloved granddaughter. She is the only person left for him in his life. He loves her more than he loves himself. What makes her happy makes him extremely joyful. He could see that his granddaughter had begun to love life. Before that, she was a very materialistic and practical girl. Whatever decision she made before was based on the benefits that it might bring and the loss that it might incur. However, after she began to read the Bible, her attitudes towards life underwent dramatic changes that her grandfather can read them in every word she speaks and every action she takes. Before she has admitted that she became a Christian, he has seen her decision has been written all over her face, and when she has confessed it, he has gladly accepted it and encouraged her to go to her church and worship her Lord.